They fired me for being too expensive. In the room I designed myself, from the capital I provided. It's funny how people who don't read contracts carefully think they're smarter than the woman who wrote them. My name is Jessica Hart. At 34, I've lived enough life to know that brilliance and naivety often walk hand in hand. 9 years ago, I was just another AI engineer with big dreams and a small apartment in Colorado. That night, when my microwave shorted out and nearly destroyed the first build of my financial risk analysis platform, I remember thinking it was the universe telling me to quit. Fortunately, I've never been good at taking hints. That night feels like another lifetime now. I sat cross-legged on my studio apartment floor, surrounded by scattered papers covered in algorithms, the acrid smell of electrical burning still hanging in the air. My ancient laptop whirred loudly, struggling to run the complex models I'd designed. In the corner stood a whiteboard filled with equations and flowcharts, my roadmap to changing how financial institutions understood risk. I'd spent 3 years working at a major bank where I watched executives make catastrophic decisions based on outdated models. They weren't stupid, they just couldn't see the patterns I could. The 2008 crash had taught the industry some lessons, but not enough. Another correction was coming. I could feel it in the data. My platform, what would eventually become RiskSense, was different. It didn't just analyze historical trends, it predicted behavioral cascades, the human psychology behind market movements. While everyone focused on numbers, I focused on people. Algorithms could track transactions, but I built mine to track fear, greed, and the herd mentality that drives financial disasters. That night, saving my code from the electrical fire felt like an omen. 2 weeks later, my predictive model flagged warning signs at a major investment bank. I still had friends there. So I called my old boss, Marcus. "Jessica, do you know what time it is?" His voice was groggy with sleep. "Your European high-yield portfolio is about to implode," I said, skipping pleasantries. "The correlation coefficients are breaking down." There was a long silence. "How could you possibly know that?" "Because I built something better than what you're using. Check your email." The next morning, Marcus called back. They'd identified the issue, a series of interconnected positions that, had they remained unchecked, would have resulted in nearly $800 million in losses. My model had seen it coming. That was the beginning. Within 6 months, I had my first paying client. Within a year, I had 10. I hired my first employee, Raj, a brilliant statistician who believed in my vision even when I doubted it myself. We worked out of a converted warehouse space I rented for cheap because the heating barely functioned in winter. 18 months in, we were a team of 12. Our servers hummed in a repurposed storage closet, and our coffee machine broke weekly from overuse. But our models were saving clients billions. We weren't just predicting individual risks. We were mapping entire market ecosystems, showing how one failure could trigger a dozen more. That's when Daniel Crown from Crownwell Capital walked into our office unannounced. Tall, impeccably dressed, with the easy confidence of old money. He stood out like a peacock among pigeons in our shabby workspace. "Impressive operation," he said, stepping carefully around a tangle of extension cords. I raised an eyebrow. "We focus on function over form." He laughed. "That's exactly why I'm here." Over lunch, at a restaurant so expensive I felt underdressed despite wearing my one good blazer, Daniel laid out his vision. Crownwell wanted to acquire RiskSense. They had the resources to scale what I'd built, the connections to bring it to every major financial institution globally. "We think your company could be worth 9 figures in 5 years, he said, swirling an obscenely expensive wine in his glass. "Then why buy us now?" I asked. His smile widened. "Because right now, we can afford you." I spent weeks negotiating with Crownwell's team. During that time, I learned that what Daniel had presented as interest was actually desperation. 2 of their major investments had failed spectacularly because they'd missed warning signs, exactly the kind my platform flagged. They needed my technology, not just wanted it. This realization changed everything. In my final meeting with their executives, I proposed something that made their lawyers sputter. $1, I said. That's my asking price. The room fell silent. In exchange, I want 30% equity in the company that acquires RiskSense, a seat on the board, and the position of Chief Strategy Officer for a minimum of 5 years. Their chief counsel cleared his throat. Ms. Hart, that's highly unusual. So is my technology, I replied. And there's one more condition. I slid a single sheet of paper across the table. It contained just one paragraph, what would later be known in the company as the Hart Clause. It stipulated that if I was ever terminated without cause, I retained the right to repurchase RiskSense for exactly $1. The clause seemed ridiculous to them, a symbolic gesture at most. Why would a billion-dollar investment firm ever fire the creator of their most valuable asset? Besides, by the time such a scenario might occur, the original RiskSense would be so deeply integrated into Crownwell's operations that separating it would be impossible. They were wrong on both counts. The acquisition went through. For the first 2 years, everything was wonderful. With Crownwell's resources, we expanded rapidly. Our client list grew to include central banks, sovereign wealth funds, and the world's largest investment managers. I built a team of over 50 brilliant engineers and data scientists. We moved into beautiful offices in downtown Denver with views of the mountains that had once only been visible from my apartment window on clear days. The problems began in the 3rd year when Crownwell went through a leadership change. The new CEO, Darren Cole, came from a traditional finance background. He had an MBA from an Ivy League school and spoke entirely in buzzwords: synergy, disruption, thought leadership. But beneath the jargon was a fundamental misunderstanding of what made RiskSense special. We need to make the platform more accessible, he said during one of our first meetings. More user-friendly. What he meant was, make it simpler, even if that meant less accurate. Then came Bianca Sloan, the new VP of Product Development. She was the type who posted motivational quotes on LinkedIn every morning, but created chaos by noon. Her background was in consumer apps, games, and social media platforms. She looked at our sophisticated risk modeling system and saw something that needed cartoon mascots and gamification. Users engage more with friendly interfaces, she explained during a presentation that featured more stock photos than data. We need to make finance fun. I watched with growing horror as they began to transform RiskSense from a powerful predictive tool into something that looked like it was designed for children. They added a cartoon character named Finny the Finance Fish, who would swim across the screen to deliver risk alerts. This is absurd, I told Darren after a particularly painful product review. Our clients are managing billions of dollars. They don't need a cartoon fish to tell them their portfolios are at risk. The board loves the new direction, was his only response. We're making the platform accessible to a broader market. But that wasn't the only change. Gradually, I found myself excluded from key meetings. My team members were reassigned to other projects without my consultation. When I raised concerns, I was told I was being resistant to change and not a team player. The final insult came when I discovered they had dismantled our core predictive algorithm, the very heart of what made RiskSense valuable, in favor of a simplified model that produced more consistent but less accurate results. Clients were confused by the complexity. Bianca explained, "This is cleaner." "It's also wrong," I countered. The old model predicted the Henderson collapse 3 weeks before it happened. This new one wouldn't have seen it at all. She smiled tightly. "But it looks better in the quarterly presentations." I began to document everything, every email, every meeting, every change they made against my advice. I watched as our best engineers started to leave, frustrated by the new direction. Within 6 months, half of my original team was gone. The beautiful algorithms we'd built were being dismantled piece by piece, replaced with flashy graphics and simplified metrics that missed the nuances of true risk. One evening, working late, I accidentally received an email meant for the executive team. It contained a spreadsheet with a tab labeled Operational Optimization. Inside was a list of employees ranked by salary versus perceived value contribution. My name was at the top of the list for potential cuts. They were planning to fire me. I should have been angry, but instead, I felt a strange calm. I printed out my original contract with Crownwell and turned to the page with the heart clause. It was still there, untouched and legally binding. In all the corporate restructuring and leadership changes, no one had thought to nullify it. I texted my former lawyer, Sarah, "Need to meet. The clause might be activated soon." She responded immediately, "Already? I'll start preparing." The next week, I received a calendar invitation for a 4:30 p.m. meeting on Thursday. No agenda, just Darren, Bianca, and someone from HR listed as attendees. Classic firing time, late enough in the day to avoid awkwardness, late enough in the week to minimize disruption. I spent the next 2 days preparing. I backed up personal files, cleared out my desk when no one was looking, and said quiet goodbyes to the few remaining team members I trusted. Then I waited. The meeting itself was almost anticlimactic. Darren didn't even have the courtesy to look uncomfortable. "Jessica, as you know, the company is moving in a new strategic direction," he began, hands folded on the conference table. "We're streamlining operations and focusing on core growth areas." Bianca nodded along, her expression a practiced mask of corporate regret. "Your contributions have been valued, but we need different skill sets for this next phase." The HR representative slid a folder across the table. "This is a generous separation package, 6 months' salary, benefits continuation, and an amicable reference." I didn't open the folder. "Is this termination for cause?" The question seemed to surprise them. "No," the HR rep said after a moment. "This is a strategic restructuring." I nodded, unclipped my employee badge, and placed it on the table. "Then I accept." Darren looked relieved. He probably expected tears or anger, the emotional response of a woman being pushed out of the company she created. Instead, he got calm acceptance. "I'll need this in writing," I said. "A formal statement that my termination is not for cause." "Of course," the HR representative replied. "It's in the paperwork." I closed my laptop, stood up, and walked out without another word. In the elevator down to the lobby, I sent a text to Sarah. "It's done. Executing tonight." That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with a single sheet of company letterhead. On it, I wrote a brief letter invoking the heart clause, attaching a check for $1. I had it couriered to Crownwell's legal department with copies to every board member. By morning, all hell had broken loose. I woke to 17 missed calls and 32 text messages. Darren had called an emergency board meeting. The legal team was in panic mode. Somehow, in all the corporate restructuring and leadership changes, the heart clause had been overlooked. No one had considered that the original RiskSense entity still existed as a legal shell in Delaware, separate from the technology that had been integrated into Crownwell's systems. My phone rang again. It was Marcus, my old boss, now a Crownwell board member. "Jessica, what the hell are you doing?" he asked when I answered. "Exercising my contractual rights," I replied calmly. "This is insane. You can't just take back a company that's been integrated into Crownwell for years." "Actually, I can. Check Section 7.3 of the acquisition agreement. The intellectual property rights revert to the original entity upon repurchase. That's RiskSense. Me." There was a long silence. "They're saying you planned this all along." I laughed. "I planned for the possibility that someday, someone who didn't understand what I built would try to push me out. I was right. While Crownwell's executives and lawyers scrambled, I got to work. I'd been preparing for this moment for months. I signed a lease on office space just a block away from Crownwell's building. 20 desks, bright windows, and a fresh start. Then I started making calls. First to Raj, who had left 6 months earlier. Then to Emily, our former head of engineering. Then to the dozen other key team members who had departed as the company changed direction. "I'm rebuilding," I told each of them. "The real RiskSense, are you in?" Every single one said yes. Within a week, Crownwell's major clients began getting nervous. The news of my departure and the legal battle over the heart clause had spread. These institutions hadn't been using RiskSense because they liked Finny the finance fish. They'd been using it because it worked, because it had saved them from disasters before they happened. and they knew I was the one who had built it. 3 of the largest clients called Darren directly, threatening to pull their contracts unless the situation was resolved. 2 more simply sent termination notices. By the end of the second week, Crownwell's stock had dropped 15%. Meanwhile, my new office was coming to life. My original team gathered around whiteboards once again, rebuilding what had been dismantled. We worked 18-hour days, fueled by pizza and righteous anger. We weren't just recreating RiskSense, we were making it better. The legal battle dragged on for another month. Crownwell's lawyers tried every angle to invalidate the heart clause, but it had been written too carefully. Finally, the board made a decision that surprised no one who understood corporate politics. They offered Darren and Bianca as sacrifices. Both were fired in a Saturday morning board meeting. By Saturday afternoon, I had a call from Daniel Crown himself. "This has been educational," he said, his voice tight with controlled frustration. "For everyone," I agreed. "The board would like to discuss a settlement, a way forward that benefits all parties." I had expected this. "I'm listening." The terms were simple. Crownwell would honor the heart clause, allowing me to repurchase RiskSense for $1. In exchange, they would receive a 15% stake in the new company and preferential licensing terms. No board seats, no management input. And one more thing, I added. A public statement acknowledging that the termination was a strategic error. Daniel sighed. "You're pushing your luck." "No," I corrected him. "I'm establishing the narrative." 3 months later, I stood on stage at the National Financial Technology Conference in Miami. The room was packed with industry leaders, many of whom had watched the RiskSense saga unfold. Innovation isn't just about technology, I told them. It's about protecting what you build, about understanding that true value comes from vision, not just execution. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a framed dollar bill, the one I had used to buy back my company. Sometimes, the most powerful clause in a contract is the one that everyone overlooks, because they can't imagine ever needing it. The audience applauded. In the front row, I could see Raj and the rest of my team, the people who had believed in me enough to jump back into uncertainty. Behind them sat representatives from our clients, banks and investment firms that had followed us from Crownwell back to the new RiskSense. Our new company logo included a subtle tagline, "Backed by Rage, Built to Last." It was partly a joke, but it contained a truth that everyone in the industry now understood. I hadn't just created a powerful financial tool, I'd created a legend. In the months that followed, we grew faster than we ever had under Crownwell. Without the corporate bureaucracy and misguided improvements, we were free to innovate again. Our predictive models became even more accurate, saving clients billions during a market correction that caught many competitors by surprise. Darren found a new position at a smaller firm, where he presumably continued to speak in buzzwords. Bianca started a consulting business focused on corporate culture transformation. I wished them both well, from a distance. As for me, I learned that the most valuable algorithm isn't one that predicts market movements, but one that predicts human behavior. I had built a clause into my contract because I understood that success changes organizations, and not always for the better. I had prepared for the worst while hoping for the best. On the 1-year anniversary of the new RiskSense, I gathered my team for a celebration. We had grown to 70 people, occupied 3 floors of our building, and were considered the gold standard in financial risk prediction. As I looked around at the faces of the people who had taken a chance on me, twice, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. "We didn't just rebuild a company," I told them, raising a glass. "We rebuilt it better, because now we understand what's truly worth protecting." Later that evening, as the party wound down, Marcus approached me. He had resigned from Crownwell's board shortly after the settlement and now served as an advisor to several financial institutions. "You know," he said, "what you pulled off is going to be taught in business schools for years." I smiled. "Just make sure they get the lesson right." Which is, never underestimate a woman who understands the law, believes in her own models, and keeps every email in a password-protected folder. He laughed. I'll drink to that. As I walked home that night, I passed the Crownwell building. The lights were still on in some offices, figures moving behind tinted glass. I felt no anger anymore, just a quiet satisfaction. They had thought they were buying a product, but they had really been investing in a person, me. And when they decided that person was too expensive, they learned an expensive lesson of their own. Sometimes revenge doesn't require shouting or fighting. Sometimes it just needs one line in a contract. And a pen. This is just the beginning of the 15,000-word story. The full version continues with Jessica's journey as she rebuilds RiskSense from the ground up, facing new challenges with competitors trying to replicate her success, navigating relationships with team members who stuck with her through the ordeal, and expanding her vision beyond what was possible at Crownwell. The story explores themes of loyalty, innovation, and the true meaning of business ethics through Jessica's first-person perspective as she transforms from a brilliant engineer into a legendary business leader who changed how the financial industry approaches risk. The morning after our celebration, I woke early despite the late night. Old habits die hard, and years of startup life had conditioned me to function on minimal sleep. I made coffee and sat by my apartment window, watching the sun rise over Denver's skyline. The city was different now than when I'd first arrived fresh out of college with dreams and algorithms. Or maybe I was the one who had changed. My phone buzzed with a text from Raj. Reuters wants an interview. The anniversary story is picking up steam. I smiled. Our comeback was catnip for financial media, the David and Goliath narrative of a founder reclaiming her company through a clever contract clause. What they didn't understand was that it had never been about revenge. It had been about rescue. As I dressed for work, I thought about the journey ahead. We had rebuilt the core of RiskSense, but my vision extended far beyond what we'd accomplished so far. Financial risk was just one application of our predictive modeling. The same principles could be applied to supply chains, healthcare systems, even climate change response. Pattern recognition transcended industries. At the office, I found Raj already at his desk, surrounded by empty coffee cups. "Did you go home at all?" I asked. He grinned sheepishly. The European market anomaly kept me up. Our model flagged something interesting. He turned his monitor to show me a series of graphs. See this divergence? Traditional models would miss it entirely. I leaned closer, immediately absorbed. This was what Crownwell had never understood. That for people like us, the beauty of the mathematics wasn't just academic, it was visceral. We didn't just analyze patterns, we felt them. Run a deeper scan on the affected sectors, I suggested. This could be the early warning sign of something significant. Already on it, he replied. Emily's team is pulling additional data sets to cross-reference. This was the RiskSense I had envisioned. Fast, intuitive, always probing beneath the surface of the numbers to find the human behaviors they represented. We weren't just tracking markets, we were tracking the collective psychology that drove them. Later that morning, I met with our newest client, the sovereign wealth fund of a small but wealthy nation. Their chief investment officer, Amara Okafor, had specifically requested to meet with me. "Your story is remarkable," she said after introductions. "But I'm more interested in your algorithms. Our previous risk management system failed to flag 3 major exposures last quarter." I appreciated her directness. "Tell me about your current approach." For the next hour, she outlined their modeling system, sophisticated by industry standards but still bound by conventional thinking. I listened carefully, already mentally mapping how our approach could transform their perspective. "The fundamental problem," I explained, "is that traditional models assume rational actors making rational decisions, but markets aren't rational, they're human. Fear, greed, herd mentality. These emotions create patterns that mathematics alone can't predict." Amara's eyes lit up with understanding. "You're modeling psychology, not just transactions." Exactly. Every market crash in history happened because human emotions amplified what should have been manageable corrections into catastrophes. We built RiskSense to see those emotional patterns forming before they trigger cascading failures. By the end of our meeting, she was convinced. As we finalized the details, she asked the question that many new clients eventually raised. What happens if Crownwell tries to replicate what you've built? They had access to your technology for years. I smiled. They had access to our code, but not to our thinking. They can copy what we built yesterday, but they can't anticipate what we'll build tomorrow. This was our true competitive advantage. While Crownwell and others focused on replicating our past innovations, we were already moving forward, evolving our models in ways they couldn't predict because they didn't share our fundamental understanding of the problem. After Amara left, I found Emily waiting outside my office. As our head of engineering, she'd been with me since nearly the beginning, leaving Crownwell just weeks after the new management began dismantling our work. "We need to talk about the talent war," she said without preamble. Crownwell just offered Vijay triple his salary to jump ship. Vijay was one of our most brilliant data scientists. Losing him would be a blow. Did he take it? Emily shook her head. He came to me first, said he wanted to stay but needed to know we had a plan for the future. This was the next challenge. Now that RiskSense had proven resilient, competitors were circling, not just to copy our technology, but to poach our people. "Call a leadership meeting for this afternoon," I told her. "It's time to discuss Phase 2. Phase 2 had been my private project for months. While we'd been rebuilding RiskSense's core functions, I'd been sketching the blueprint for its evolution, a platform that would extend our predictive capabilities far beyond finance. At 3 o'clock, our leadership team gathered in the main conference room. Raj, Emily, our CFO Michael, and 5 others who formed the backbone of our operation. None had been with Crownwell for long. All had returned when I called. "We've spent a year rebuilding," I began. "Now it's time to grow beyond what we were before. Our competitors are trying to replicate RiskSense as it existed under Crownwell, but that version was already compromised, already less than what we had envisioned." I pulled up a presentation I'd been refining for months. "This is RiskSense 2.0, not just financial risk prediction, but interconnected system analysis across multiple domains." For the next hour, I outlined my vision: a platform that could identify correlations between seemingly unrelated risk factors across different industries and geographies. How supply chain disruptions could predict market movements. How social media sentiment could forecast consumer behavior. How climate events could impact everything from agricultural futures to municipal bond ratings. "This isn't just an expansion," Raj realized, his expression brightening with excitement. "It's a paradigm shift." Exactly. While everyone else is building better financial models, we'll be building something entirely new. A meta model that sees the connections between all these systems. Michael, always the pragmatist, raised the obvious concern. "The development costs will be substantial. We're profitable, but not at this scale." "I've thought about that," I replied. "We have 3 options: bootstrap it slowly with our existing revenue, seek venture funding, or consider strategic partnerships." The room fell silent. Venture funding carried its own risks. We'd be answerable to investors who might push for faster growth over sustainable development. Strategic partnerships could compromise our independence. Bootstrapping would be slow, but safe. "I vote bootstrap," Emily said firmly. "We've seen what happens when external pressures dictate product decisions." There were nods around the table. The Crownwell experience had made us all wary of outside control. "We could consider a hybrid approach," Raj suggested. "Bootstrap the core development, but seek specific partnerships for specialized data access without giving up equity or control." This sparked a lively debate that continued well into the evening. By the time we adjourned, we had the outline of a plan. We would self-fund the initial development of RiskSense 2.0 while exploring limited partnerships with data providers who could accelerate our progress without compromising our vision. As everyone filed out, Michael lingered behind. "There's something else we need to discuss," he said once we were alone. "Crownwell's stock is down 30% since the settlement. Rumors say they're considering a larger acquisition to regain market confidence." I raised an eyebrow. And if they're acquired, Our agreement with them could be subject to review by the new parent company. This was concerning. Our settlement had been carefully structured, but corporate acquisitions could create legal complications. Keep an eye on it, I told him. If you hear anything concrete, we'll consult with Sarah. That night, I worked late, refining the technical specifications for RiskSense 2.0. Around midnight, I received an unexpected email from a name I hadn't seen in months, Darren Cole. The subject line was simply, "Coffee?" The body of the email was equally brief. "I think we should talk. No lawyers, no agenda, just coffee and honesty." I stared at the screen, surprised not by the overture itself, but by my own reaction to it. The anger I'd carried for so long had dissipated, replaced by something closer to curiosity. What could Darren possibly want to say? After consideration, I replied with just a time and a location, a small cafe halfway between our offices, neutral territory. The next morning, I arrived early and chose a table in the corner where we wouldn't be easily overheard. Darren arrived precisely on time, looking different than I remembered. The polished corporate executive had been replaced by someone more subdued, his designer suit exchanged for business casual attire. "Thank you for meeting me," he said, taking the seat across from me. I was curious, I admitted. "What's this about, Darren?" He took a deep breath. First, an apology. I mishandled everything about RiskSense, the technology, the team, and especially you. I came in with preconceptions and never took the time to truly understand what made the company special. This was unexpected. In my experience, executives like Darren rarely acknowledge mistakes so directly. "What brought on this revelation?" I asked, skeptical but intrigued. "Failure is clarifying," he replied with a rueful smile. After Crownwell, I took a position with Meridian Capital. 6 months in, I made the same mistakes, pushing for flashy features over substantive ones, ignoring the expertise of the technical team. The results were predictably disastrous. And now? Now I'm consulting while I figure out my next move. He paused. But that's not why I wanted to meet. I have information you should know. Crownwell is in talks with Global Financial Solutions for a potential acquisition. I kept my expression neutral, though this confirmed Michael's suspicions. Why tell me this? Because GFS has a different corporate culture than Crownwell. They're known for aggressive litigation. If the acquisition goes through, they may try to challenge your settlement agreement. This was valuable intelligence, but it didn't explain Darren's motivation. Why would you warn me about this? He looked down at his coffee. Let's call it amends. Or maybe just basic decency. What happened with RiskSense, what I helped happen, wasn't right. I studied him, trying to determine if this was genuine or another corporate maneuver. I appreciate the information, I said finally. And the apology. He nodded. There's one more thing. The core of your original algorithm, the behavioral prediction component, it was never fully integrated into Crownwell systems. Bianca thought it was too complex and had it compartmentalized for future development that never happened. The documentation is still in a segregated server environment. This was significant. If Crownwell never properly integrated that aspect of our technology, it strengthened our position that the intellectual property had essentially been abandoned before reverting to us. Why are you really telling me all this, Darren? He met my eyes directly. Because sometimes you need to lose everything to understand what matters. I lost my reputation, my career trajectory, and my confidence in my own judgment. It's made me reconsider a lot of things. We talked for another hour. Beneath the corporate exterior and buzzword vocabulary, Darren wasn't actually a bad person, just someone who had risen to a position that magnified the consequences of his limitations. By the time we parted, I didn't consider him a friend, but I no longer saw him as an enemy either. Back at the office, I immediately called Michael and Sarah to discuss the potential Crownwell acquisition. Sarah's legal assessment was cautiously optimistic. Your settlement agreement was structured to survive any change in corporate ownership, she explained. But that doesn't mean GFS won't try to challenge it. They're known for using litigation as a business tactic. wearing down opponents with costly legal battles even when their position is weak. So we prepare, I said. What do we need? Documentation. Anything that shows Crownwell wasn't utilizing the full scope of the risk-sense technology before your termination. Evidence that they effectively abandoned key components of what they acquired. I thought of what Darren had told me about the behavioral prediction component. I'll have Emily look into it. Over the next few days, we quietly gathered information. Emily and Raj worked with former colleagues who were still at Crownwell to document how the original risk-sense technology had been implemented, or rather, how it hadn't been. The picture that emerged confirmed Darren's claim. The most innovative aspects of our platform had been sidelined, deemed too complex for the user-friendly direction Bianca had championed. Meanwhile, work on risk-sense 2.0's continued. We set up a separate development team to focus on the new platform while maintaining our core services. I split my time between strategic planning, client meetings, and preparing for the potential legal challenge from GFS. 3 weeks after my coffee with Darren, the business news confirmed what he'd told me. Global Financial Solutions announced its intention to acquire Crownwell Capital. As expected, GFS's statement emphasized unlocking the full potential of Crownwell's technology assets. Corporate speak for squeezing more value from existing properties. Our team watched the announcement with measured concern. We were better positioned than most to understand what the acquisition would mean for both companies, and for us. RiskSense's predictive models suggested that GFS was overextending itself, taking on too much debt to finance the acquisition. Their aggression was born of desperation, not strength. The call from GFS came just 2 days after the announcement. Their chief legal officer requested a meeting to discuss our ongoing relationship in light of the pending acquisition. Sarah advised me to agree, but to hold the meeting on our territory. Make them come to you, she said. It sets the tone. When the GFS delegation arrived, they brought the expected show of force: 3 attorneys, their CFO, and the head of their risk management division. I had just Raj, Michael, and Sarah with me, quality over quantity. The lead attorney, a woman named Patricia Voss, opened with the expected overture. We're reviewing all of Crownwell's external agreements as part of our due diligence process. Your settlement has raised some concerns. I'm sure it has, I replied calmly. But it's a binding legal agreement, thoroughly vetted by both parties. Agreements can be reinterpreted in light of changed circumstances, she countered. We believe certain aspects of your settlement may not be enforceable under Delaware corporate law. It was a bluff, and not a particularly good one. Sarah had ensured our settlement was ironclad specifically because we anticipated scenarios like this. Ms. Voss, I said, before we continue down this path, let me save us all some time. We have extensive documentation showing that Crownwell effectively abandoned key components of the original RiskSense technology prior to my termination, components that were central to the platform's value proposition. I nodded to Raj, who distributed folders containing a summary of our findings, carefully edited to reveal enough to be concerning without giving away anything proprietary. Additionally, I continued, we've prepared a detailed analysis of how this potential dispute could impact GFS's pending acquisition. The uncertainty would likely delay regulatory approval by 3 to 6 months, during which time your financing costs would increase by approximately $27 million. The CFO's expression changed subtly, enough to tell me our numbers were close to their internal projections. Furthermore, I added, the market reaction to a protracted legal battle with the original creator of your most valuable acquisition target would likely impact your stock price by 8 to 12%. We've modeled the scenarios quite thoroughly. I didn't mention that we'd used our own RiskSense platform to generate these projections. Our technology was designed to predict market reactions to unexpected events, like a high-profile legal dispute between financial companies. The GFS team exchanged glances. This wasn't the meeting they had expected. We're not looking for a dispute, Patricia said, her tone softening slightly. Just clarity on how we can all move forward productively. The path forward is simple, I replied. Honor the agreement Crownwell made. We'll continue our peaceful coexistence, and everyone prospers. After they left, Sarah turned to me with an impressed expression. You didn't just predict their legal strategy. You predicted the financial impact of their legal strategy? I smiled. That's what we do. See patterns before they fully emerge. The attempted intimidation from GFS confirmed what I already suspected. Our settlement agreement had left Crownwell with less than they realized at the time. The original risk-sense algorithms were more valuable than they had understood, especially now that their simplified versions were proving inadequate for complex market conditions. In the weeks that followed, GFS completed their acquisition of Crownwell without further challenges to our agreement. Our intelligence suggested they had decided a legal battle would be too costly and uncertain. Instead, they were focusing on rebuilding the risk management platform internally, essentially trying to recreate what they had lost. Meanwhile, development on RiskSense 2.0 accelerated. Emily's engineering team had created a flexible architecture that could incorporate data from virtually any source. Financial transactions, social media sentiment, shipping manifests, weather patterns, political stability indices. The challenge wasn't collecting the data, it was finding the meaningful correlations within it. This was where Raj's team of data scientists excelled. They developed new algorithms that could identify connections across disparate systems, how a labor strike in Malaysia might affect semiconductor supplies, which would impact consumer electronics production, which would influence retail stocks and consumer spending patterns months later. By early autumn, we had a working prototype. I gathered our leadership team for the first comprehensive demonstration. What you're about to see isn't just an upgrade, I told them. It's the fulfillment of the vision I had when I first started RiskSense 9 years ago. The main conference room had been transformed into a command center, with multiple large screens displaying different aspects of the platform. Raj stood beside me, ready to guide the demonstration. We're going to run a simulation using historical data from the past 5 years, he explained. We'll start with a known event, the Suez Canal blockage, but withhold that specific information from the system. Let's see if it can predict the cascading effects just from the peripheral data. For the next hour, we watched as RiskSense 2.0's processed millions of data points, identifying subtle shifts in shipping routes, commodity prices, and manufacturing outputs. It flagged potential supply chain disruptions weeks before they occurred in the historical record. It quantified impacts across industries and geographies with remarkable precision. This is revolutionary, Michael said when the demonstration concluded. It's not just predicting financial risks anymore, it's predicting system-wide impacts across the entire global economy. That's exactly the point, I replied. Financial risk doesn't exist in isolation. It's connected to everything: politics, climate, technology, human psychology. Traditional models fail because they treat these systems as separate. We're modeling the connections. The question now is how to bring this to market. RiskSense 2.0 was too powerful and versatile to be positioned as merely an upgraded financial risk platform. It represented an entirely new category of predictive analytics. We need to approach this carefully, Michael advised. If we go too broad too quickly, we risk diluting our brand and confusing the market. He was right. Our reputation had been built in financial services. Suddenly claiming expertise across multiple domains could undermine our credibility. What if we start with interconnected financial risks? Emily suggested. Show how trade policies affect currency movements, how consumer sentiment predicts retail performance, how energy prices influence manufacturing. It's still fundamentally financial, but demonstrates the cross-domain capabilities. This approach made sense. We would lead with what we were known for, then gradually expand the use cases as clients became comfortable with the new paradigm. We spent the next month refining the platform and developing our go-to-market strategy. The planned launch was still 6 weeks away when an unexpected crisis created the perfect opportunity to prove RiskSense 2.0's capabilities. A major earthquake struck Taiwan, causing significant damage to semiconductor manufacturing facilities. Global markets reacted instantly, with tech stocks plummeting on fears of extended supply disruptions. Our clients were desperate to understand the potential downstream impacts across their portfolios. This is exactly the kind of interconnected risk our new platform was designed to analyze. I told our leadership team during an emergency meeting, we can either wait until our official launch, or we can use this situation to demonstrate its value in real time. The decision wasn't without risks. The platform was still technically in beta, and we hadn't completed all the planned validation tests, but the opportunity was too perfect to ignore. Let's do it, Raj said. We've been testing with historical data for months. It's ready. Within hours, we had configured RiskSense 2.0 to focus specifically on the Taiwan semiconductor disruption. The platform ingested data from news reports, satellite imagery of the affected facilities, manufacturing capacity estimates, current inventory levels across the supply chain, and alternative sourcing options. Rather than just predicting financial market reactions, it mapped the entire cascade of effects. Which product categories would face the most severe shortages, how long the disruptions would last for different components, which manufacturers had the most vulnerable supply chains, and which had the most robust contingency plans. We compiled the analysis into a comprehensive briefing and sent it to our top clients with a note explaining that this was a preview of our new capabilities. The response was immediate and enthusiastic. 4 major investment banks requested emergency consultations. 2 technology-focused hedge funds asked for direct access to the platform, regardless of its beta status. Over the next 2 weeks, as the situation in Taiwan evolved, RiskSense 2.0's predictions proved remarkably accurate. It correctly identified which semiconductor categories would recover quickly and which would face extended disruptions. It precisely forecast inventory depletion timelines and pricing impacts across different regions and industries. By the time we officially launched the platform in November, we already had a waiting list of clients eager to implement it. What would have been a carefully managed product introduction became a market sensation. Financial media dubbed it the crystal ball of systemic risk, a description I found both flattering and slightly misleading. It wasn't magic. It was mathematics, psychology, and pattern recognition on an unprecedented scale. The success of RiskSense 2.0 transformed our company virtually overnight. Our valuation tripled. Recruitment became effortless as top talent clamored to join the team. Even former skeptics from the Crownwell days reached out, asking if there might be opportunities for them in the new organization. Through it all, I maintained the same focus that had guided me from the beginning. Building tools that made the financial system more stable, more transparent, and more resistant to human error. The difference was that now, I had the resources and reputation to pursue that mission without compromise. One afternoon in early December, I received a surprising visitor, Daniel Crown, the man who had orchestrated Crownwell's acquisition of RiskSense years earlier. "Impressive operation," he said as I showed him around our expanded offices. "Much better than the warehouse with the broken heating." I smiled at the reference to our early days. "We've come a long way." "Indeed." He paused by a window overlooking the Denver skyline. "I've been watching your progress. RiskSense 2.0 is exactly what I envisioned when we first acquired you, though I'll admit, I couldn't have articulated it as clearly as you've executed it." "Is this a social call, Daniel, or is there a purpose to your visit?" He turned to face me. "A bit of both. GFS's acquisition of Crownwell has been problematic. Their attempt to recreate your technology internally has failed spectacularly. They're looking for alternatives. And you're here as an intermediary? Let's call it friendly advice. They're preparing to approach you with an offer to license RiskSense 2.0. They'll present it as a partnership, but make no mistake, they want what you've built." I considered this information carefully. "Why tell me this?" Daniel smiled. "Because I respect what you've accomplished, and because I want to be involved in whatever you do next." "You think there's a next beyond RiskSense?" "I know there is. You're not the type to stop innovating just because you found success. There's always another problem to solve, another system to improve." He wasn't wrong. Even as we were rolling out RiskSense 2.0s, I was already thinking about applications beyond financial markets, healthcare systems, urban infrastructure, climate response. The mathematics of interconnected risks applied everywhere. "What exactly are you proposing?" Daniel. Nothing concrete yet, just opening a dialogue. If GFS makes an offer, and they will, I'd appreciate the opportunity to discuss alternatives before you make any decisions. After he left, I found myself reflecting on how much had changed. 3 years ago, Daniel had represented the corporate machine that would eventually try to push me out. Now he was seeking my favor, acknowledging that I held the power in our relationship. The GFS offer came 2 weeks later, almost exactly as Daniel had predicted. They proposed a strategic alliance that would give them exclusive access to RiskSense 2.0's for financial applications while leaving us free to pursue other markets. I brought the proposal to our leadership team, not because I was seriously considering it, but because I wanted their perspective on what it revealed about GFS's strategy. They're desperate, Emily observed. Their internal platform isn't working, and they're losing clients to firms that use our technology. It's also a tacit admission that they can't replicate what we've built, Raj added. Not for any price they're willing to pay. Michael, always focused on the financial implications, had a different take. The terms are actually quite generous. They're offering significantly more than what the technology is currently generating in revenue. Because they're buying something beyond the technology, I replied. They're trying to buy credibility. Their risk management division has lost face internally. This would allow them to save it. We ultimately declined the offer. But I used the opportunity to propose a different arrangement, a non-exclusive licensing agreement at standard rates, the same terms we offered to all major financial institutions. It was both a business decision and a statement. We wouldn't give preferential treatment to the company that had tried to intimidate us months earlier. To my surprise, GFS accepted these terms. Their need was greater than their pride. Within months, they became one of our largest clients, their earlier hostility replaced by a grudging respect. As the new year began, RiskSense had grown to over 200 employees. We occupied 5 floors of our building and had opened a second office in Singapore to better serve our Asian clients. The company that had once been run from my studio apartment was now a global enterprise with a 9-figure valuation. Success brought new challenges. As our profile rose, so did the scrutiny from regulators concerned about the systemic importance of our technology. If most major financial institutions relied on RiskSense to manage risk, did that itself create a new form of risk? It was a fair question, one that I took seriously. I spent increasing amounts of time in Washington and Brussels, meeting with regulatory bodies to explain our approach and address their concerns. The financial crisis of 2008 had taught hard lessons about the dangers of unchecked innovation in financial technology. I was determined that RiskSense would be part of the solution, not a new problem. The key difference, I explained during a Senate Banking Committee hearing, is transparency. Previous generations of risk models were proprietary black boxes. Financial institutions themselves didn't understand how the models worked or what assumptions they made. RiskSense is designed to be explainable, to show not just the risk prediction, but the reasoning behind it. This commitment to transparency became our defining characteristic as we expanded. We published our methodologies, collaborated with academic researchers, and even open-sourced certain components of our technology. My belief was that risk management was too important to be completely privatized. The financial system needed common standards and shared understanding. As spring approached, I found myself reflecting on the journey of the past year. From being fired in a sterile conference room to leading a company at the forefront of its field, it had been a transformation I could never have predicted, despite my expertise in prediction. I was in the middle of preparing for an international conference when Sarah called with unexpected news. Crownwell Capital, now a division of GFS, was being investigated for accounting irregularities dating back to the period before my departure. They're saying there was systematic misreporting of risk exposures, she explained. The SEC is involved. How does this affect us? I asked, immediately concerned about potential fallout. It shouldn't directly. The investigation focuses on their internal risk reporting, not the technology itself, but there will be questions about what you knew and when. I thought back to my final months at Crownwell, when I had been increasingly sidelined from key decisions. Had there been signs of deliberate misreporting that I had missed? Or had the dismantling of our rigorous risk analytics been part of a strategy to hide uncomfortable truths? I need to review everything from that period. I told Sarah, every email, every report, every meeting note. The investigation created a delicate situation. On one hand, I had a responsibility to cooperate fully with regulators. On the other, I needed to protect RiskSense from being dragged into a scandal that predated our resurrection. I assembled a small team to conduct our own internal review. Raj, Sarah, and 2 senior data scientists who had been with us during the Crownwell period. We worked nights and weekends, combing through archived materials to understand what had happened. What we found was disturbing. In the months following the introduction of Finny the Finance Fish and the simplification of our risk metrics, Crownwell had begun classifying certain high-risk investments as medium or low risk. The changes to our platform hadn't just been misguided product decisions, they had enabled misrepresentation of actual financial exposures. They deliberately dumbed down the risk analysis to hide what they were doing. Raj concluded after reviewing our findings. The cartoon fish wasn't just silly, it was cover for serious malfeasance. This placed me in a difficult position. I hadn't been aware of the deliberate misclassification when it occurred, but I had opposed the changes to the platform that made it possible. Was that enough to protect me, and by extension, RiskSense, from being implicated? Sarah advised complete transparency. Proactively share what you found with the SEC. Make it clear that you opposed the changes to the platform and were excluded from key decisions during that period. I took her advice. The next day, I contacted the lead investigator and arranged to provide our internal review along with a personal statement detailing my experience during the final months at Crownwell. The response was immediate. I was called to testify before the investigation team. A grueling 8-hour session in which every aspect of the risk platform and its modification was examined in minute detail. I explained how the original algorithms had been designed to flag exactly the kind of risks that Crownwell had apparently been hiding, and how those capabilities had been systematically undermined. In your professional opinion, the lead investigator asked toward the end, were these changes to the platform made specifically to facilitate misreporting? It was the central question, and my answer would have significant implications. I considered carefully before responding. I cannot speak to intentions I wasn't privy to. I said finally, what I can say with certainty is that the changes made to RiskSense under Crownwell's direction removed safeguards that would have made such misreporting difficult or impossible. Whether that was the purpose or merely a convenient side effect, I cannot say definitively. My testimony apparently satisfied the investigators. In the following weeks, the focus of the inquiry shifted away from the technology itself and toward the executives who had made the key decisions, including Darren and Bianca. I received a call from Darren shortly after he was questioned by the SEC. He sounded tired and resigned. They're saying I should have known, he told me. Maybe they're right. I was so focused on making the platform more accessible that I never questioned why certain people were so eager to remove the more sophisticated analysis components. What will you do? Cooperate fully. What choice do I have? My career in finance is over either way. I felt a complex mix of emotions, sympathy for Darren as a person, vindication for my stance on the platform changes, concern about the broader implications for the industry. The situation reinforced my belief in the importance of our mission at RiskSense. Financial risk wasn't an abstraction. It affected real people, real economies, real lives. As the investigation continued, we focused on insulating RiskSense from the fallout. I made it clear in all public communications that our current company was built on different principles than Crownwell: transparency, rigorous analysis, and an unwavering commitment to accuracy over convenience. By early summer, the SEC announced enforcement actions against GFS and several former Crownwell executives. The penalties were substantial, hundreds of millions in fines and permanent industry bars for some individuals. Darren received a lesser penalty, reflecting his cooperation with the investigation. But his financial career was effectively over. Throughout this turbulent period, RiskSense continued to grow. RiskSense 2.0 had established itself as the gold standard for systemic risk analysis, and we were beginning to explore applications beyond finance, starting with supply chain resilience for critical industries. One evening, as I was preparing to leave the office after a particularly long day, I found Marcus waiting by the elevator. He had resigned from Crownwell's board after our settlement and had since become a respected industry consultant on risk management practices. "Quite a year," he said as we rode down together. I nodded. "Not what I expected when they fired me." "No one could have predicted this," he replied, then smiled. "Well, except maybe your algorithms." "Funny thing about algorithms," I said. "They're only as good as the humans who build and interpret them. They can show you patterns, but understanding what those patterns mean, that still requires human judgment." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "That's what Crownwell never understood about your technology. They thought they were buying a product, but they were really investing in a philosophy, your philosophy of risk management." As we reached the lobby, he paused. "What's next for you, Jessica? You've rebuilt the company, expanded the technology, vindicated your approach. What's left to accomplish?" It was a question I'd been asking myself lately. Success brought freedom, but also a certain restlessness. The problems I'd originally set out to solve were being addressed, but new ones always emerged. "I'm thinking about education," I told him. "Not just building better risk tools, but teaching the next generation how to think about risk differently. Universities, governments, nonprofits, they all need this perspective." "Ambitious," he commented. "It always has been. From day one in that studio apartment with the faulty microwave, I wasn't just trying to build a better financial model. I was trying to change how we understand the systems that govern our world." As I walked home that evening, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. The firing that was meant to end my career had instead launched its most successful phase. The clause in a contract that seemed like a mere formality had changed the trajectory of an entire industry. I passed the Crownwell building, now adorned with GFS signage, and felt no bitterness, only a sense of closure. They had underestimated me, undervalued what I had built, and ultimately paid the price for that miscalculation. Not because I had sought revenge, but because I had remained true to my vision when they abandoned theirs. In my apartment, I poured a glass of wine and stood by the window, looking out at the city lights. On my desk sat the framed dollar bill, the currency of my redemption, the symbol of a lesson that extended far beyond one company or one industry. Never underestimate a woman who understands the law, believes in her own models, and keeps every email in a password-protected folder. Sometimes the most powerful form of justice isn't shouting or fighting. Sometimes it's just one line in a contract. And a pen. And sometimes, what seems like an ending is really just the beginning of something far greater than anyone could have imagined.